All right, so it's great to see everybody for a return to Tanya Tuesday. And we are in the middle of chapter 43, but don't worry. If it's been a while for you, I will give a little recap of what we've discussed in chapter 43 until now. So we are in the section of Tanya where we have been discussing the actual emotions of awe and love. And actually, love will start in this chapter, and we started off this chapter with awe. Chapter 42 was also about awe. Chapter 41 was also about awe. In chapter 43, at some point today, we're going to switch over to love. And that will be actually our main topic all the way through chapter 50. Okay, so that's a pretty powerful discussion. So again, chapter 41, 42, and part of 43 is awe, and chapter 43 all the way through chapter 49 is love, except for a little break in chapter 45 where we discuss compassion. So that's a little bit of a map. And so you can imagine if we're spending so many chapters on love, we're going to have a lot to say about it. So buckle up and get ready for the ride. But today we're going to start first with awe. Okay, we explained last time the concept that if there is no fear, there's no wisdom. If there's no wisdom, there's no fear. Or as the other Mishnah says, if there's no awe, there's no love. If there's no love, there's no awe. And basically, we explained that there are two layers of love and two layers of awe. And there's a very basic layer of awe, and without the most basic layer of awe, um, you will not go anywhere. As they say, you gotta walk before you can run. Okay? So, in other words, in order to experience the spirituality and godliness, one needs to first have awe of God and do the actions that are necessary. I want to say very fascinating connected with this. So I just read on Shabbat, it's a famous book, old book. I don't know if anybody ever read this, Nine and a Half Mystics. You ever read Nine and a Half Mystics? So I did not read the whole book, but it's written by, he was a Reform rabbi, Herbert Weiner. And he went to meet a bunch of mystics throughout the US. This was in the 50s and 60s, okay? And one of the mystics he met, of course, was the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So I've always known about this meeting and I've heard his videos talk about it, but I wanted to actually read what he wrote about it. It's like, 50 pages or whatever, talking about his meeting with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Fascinating, beautiful stuff that I can pull out from there. And he met many, many mystics. And actually, towards before he retired, he came to the Rebbe again for dollars, and the Rebbe told him, "When you retire, tell your congregation that really that really you really you're Orthodox." And so at his retirement party, he actually told his congregation, and one of the guys came over to him and said, "Don't worry, we knew that already." But anyways, it's a fascinating read when you read his book because you see a guy that is living in the Reform world and is starting to see, by going to visit all these mystics, and it seems like he never was able to get off of it. Like he was into all different modalities of spirituality, but he himself writes at the end, and that's really the most fascinating part. So he has the whole book, The Nine and a Half Mystics. Then he has in the epilogue, and it's very much worth a read. But he basically says, um, when it comes to trying spirituality, he says you can either uh, follow the well-trodden path, which is what Judaism gives, is mysticism connected with the actions, with the halakha, with Jewish law. Okay. Then there is a spirituality which is not related to Judaism at all. It's a whole nother modality. And he says if you want to like say that there's a Jewish spirituality that's not connected to the deeds, he's like it's a really narrow bridge that is almost hard to even stay on. That's what he writes. It's a really narrow bridge because either you're heading back into action indeed, the traditional Orthodox way, which is seemingly what he seems is the correct way, which again, like I said, is actually how he lived the rest of his life after he retired. And even while he was the rabbi there, he was the Rebbe told him, bring more deeds, bring more mitzvahs into the reform practice. Or he says, or you're just leaving Judaism altogether, just going into general spirituality. So it's very interesting for him to see that. Um, so it's very worth it read. I might one day decide to read it to you because it's a very powerful section here. We might, do a reading together because it's very much. he actually clearly has a very good grasp of the Tanya as well. I wrote some of the things he wrote. He had a lot, very, very good grasp. Um, but that's the point. The point is that this is kind of what the Tanya here is making. The Tanya here is making the argument that you want to go to these higher levels of spirituality, you need to start with the basics. You need to start with the reverence and the awe of God that leads to action. And without the action, you will not be able to progress in further levels of spirituality and connection to God. So I'm gonna run through the thank you, Nina. It's good to see you as well. I'm gonna run through the beginning of chapter 43, which we read last time. I'll go quickly, and then I'll get to where we were up to today. So let's start again, talking about the first step is talk about you gotta walk before you can run. So he says like this. Regarding this lower reverence, which we have defined as any reverence that directly inspires the observance of God mitzvahs. It could be something as simple as knowing God is king, and you got to listen to him. To turn away from evil and do good. Regarding this lower reverence, our sages said, if there's no reverence, there's no wisdom. And an expanded mind meditation will also include meditating on the chain of spiritual worlds, extending up and beyond to the greatest heights. Nevertheless, the reverence produced from this above meditation is still superficial and lower reverence, even though it's from an expanded state of mind. It's superficial because it's inspired by the greatness of God as it manifests through the created worlds, which are mere garments of the King, blessed the Holy One, which is found in them in a hidden and concealed and garbed way, so as to energize them and sustain them, so there should be something from nothing. So what he's saying here is like this. Only low reverence is important since it's the gateway and password to observe Torah mitzvahs. So what he's saying is just to remind ourselves. So what differentiates between a lower reverence and a higher reverence? A lower reverence means that I am in awe or in fear of whatever it is as it pertains to me. It's not about that person, it's about me, right? So if I think about God, he's watching me. I think about how God gives me life. I think about how God is the source of all the worlds, therefore I should listen to him. But it's all a focus on me. It's not a focus on God himself. Then there's a deeper reverence of love for God when we're not focusing on God's effect on the world because it's not a focus on how it pertains to me. It's a focus on God Himself. That's spirit. That's what people really call spirituality. Is when you can get to a place where you're literally focused on the spirit. What is behind God? What is um, the essence of God? So it's like a child who, when they're younger, it only understands their parent possibly sometimes as much as they relate to their, what they're doing for them. I would actually say really the beginning of any relationship is like that, right? When you first have a relationship with someone, any relationship, it starts off very superficial. It starts off with the externalities of the person. Even if you can see they have a beautiful personality inside, you don't really fully grasp that inner personality and appreciate it till much time is spent with that person. It always starts on the superficialities of that person, and you appreciate those superficialities. But the superficialities that you appreciate are more about you. You haven't really come to full appreciation of that person for them themselves. As a relationship develops and deepens, you come to a place where you appreciate that person much more. There's the famous story. A lady was complaining to the Rebbe. She couldn't she was having trouble finding a shidduch, finding a man to marry. So the Rebbe told her, "You're reading too many romance novels. The romance novels all describe these infatuation and love." He says, "It's not really love. It's infatuation. It's all about yourself. What you like." He says, "A true relationship, that's how it starts. But ultimately, you get to a place. A true relationship will get to a place as it develops, which could take many years, and you're not going to see right away, and might be described in the books, but it doesn't go as fast as the books either. Is where you view yourselves as inseparable, where you appreciate the other person for who they are, right? How do we have spouses that take care of each other? One of them gets very sick. So unfortunately, sometimes people divorce. It happens, but often spouses stick it out and take care of each other. Why? Because they've gone beyond a superficiality. They appreciate the person for who they are, and so that's the same thing over here. The first level of reverence for God just makes us it's on the externality of God. It's what God does for us, or we're afraid of God or whatever, and that makes us do the deed. That's the first step. Then as you develop and deepen your relationship, you appreciate God for who he is himself, which can lead to levels of love and levels of reverence. And so that's the next step that Tanya's going to talk about, the deeper level of reverence. Let's take a look here. So he says, but the higher reverence is a reverence arising from a sense of shame in God's presence. And it is a deep reverence, um, um, but a higher reverence is reverence arising from a sense of shame in God's presence. Um, and it is a deep reverence which draws, which results from awareness, not from the awesomeness of the spiritual worlds themselves, but of the core godliness within the world. So now, what makes you ashamed of God? Not the fact that God vivifies the world, because that vivifying the world continues whether you're sinning or you're not. Shame comes from a deep appreciation of the core of God. You're ashamed to be in God's essence and to be doing something wrong. That's where the shame comes from. It's only when you appreciate God's essence. When you understand how God creates all the worlds, okay, so I'm sinning. So he's creating all the worlds. I'm sinning. It might not be nice to him, but there's not a sense of shame in his presence. It's only when you can when you can actually sense him himself as not as it relates to you, but when you can think, let's put it this way. A lot of times people are not sensitive to other people. Why? Because they never even sense the other person, right? You ever met these people? They don't have a feeling for other people. They only know other people as it pertains to themselves. And that's why sometimes they have no shame and they have no, they can offend people. Like they don't see the other person. The person they see is only in as much as it relates to them and gives to them, right? So it's the same thing here. To feel a shame in front of God requires a level of respecting the essence of God Himself, feeling something beyond what can help you. It is of this higher reverence, the sages said, if there's no wisdom, there's no reverence. Um, since we learned above the term chokhmah, the power of what? Meaning chokhmah has the ability to see objectively things that are outside of yourself. And chachma, from where it's found, is meaning. Talmud also hints, who is a wise person? One who sees the future outcome. Meaning, generally we say, who is a wise person? He who seeks the future outcome. Meaning, you can see the long term, right? That's what we generally take it to mean. A wise person sees, oh, if I smoke, long term, it's going to be unhealthy, right? But no, in Kabbalah, it means that a wise person sees where everything is coming from. Where did everything come from? Outcome. Where did everything come out of? Meaning, when you use your chokhmah, you see and perceive how everything in the universe is born and comes into being continually, something from nothing. So the meditation of chokhmah allows you to see beyond what you see. Um, your chokhmah will enable you to see how the world is utterly dependent on God's creative power, God's world and breath of His mouth, as the verse states, and from the breath of His mouth all the world's contents came to be. And if so, which means that apparently separate identities, that the sky and the earth and all their contents are in reality voided in the power being God's word and His breath, which we explained in chapter 21. So again, if you meditate, um, so what he's explaining here is like this. If when you take a moment, let me put it into other words. In order to have any relationship to God requires the use of our mind because we don't physically see God. So we're trying with our mind to see God, similar to how, I know you ever seen like people are very healthy, right? They literally look at sugar and see it as poison. Now it doesn't look like poison, but it can look poison to them because they have habituated their mind to see those types of things in that. And there's other foods and other actions that many of us might see within it deeply what it really is, even though you don't physically see it. It's the same thing with God. So if we habituate ourselves to look at the world and realize that the world cannot exist without God's vivifying world, you can come to a point where just like when you see sugar, you see poison, you don't see the world, you see God. And when you start to see God, then you can feel God everywhere. Then you can start to feel God everywhere. And then he continues over here. When you see God everywhere, you will realize that everything in this world is nothing and really null and void, just as the rays of the light of the sun are voided within the globe of the sun itself, right? When the sun's rays are in the sun itself, you don't see the rays as a separate entity. They're subsumed within the sun. So similarly, if we realize that we are truly subsumed in God's energy, we would start to see only God. And then he continues here, don't just look at the world around you, look at yourself as well. In other words, it's not enough to say, oh, the world around me is subsumed in God, but I observe that from the outside. No, we need to realize even us, ourselves, we are subsumed within God. And that's what he says. A person should never remove himself from the group, meaning that your soul, your nefesh, ruach, and neshama, which are three levels of the soul, are also voided of their separate identity by God's word. As we learned in chapter 21, God's speech is not like human speech, which leaves a person after it has spoken. Rather, God's speech is one with him, just like his thought. Meaning, when God created this world with speech, that speech is always connected to God, unlike when we talk, our words are separate from us, and that speech is continuously creating the world, which means the entire world is subsumed within God's speech, which is God's vivifying energy, which is connected to God at every single moment. So we are all right now subsumed within God, and so there really is no separate identity. It's like the video I've shown before, we're like drops of the ocean in the ocean. If we were to realize that, we'd realize we're nothing separate from God. Now we're up to where we got to last time, but I'm just going to finish off here because it's really the same point, and you know, don't want to do the depth twice. As we explained these points above at length, with the example of the human psyche, where we concluded that even if, in the case of human beings, one spoken word or thought is utterly insignificant compared to the soul, then certainly God's speech is insignificant compared to his thought. Meaning, you can think many words throughout your day. One thought, one word that you think in your mind is like nothing compared to your entire soul, right? So similarly, the speech of God as vivifying this world is completely subsumed and nullified inside of God. And this is why the verse states, look, reverence of God, that's wisdom. Meaning wisdom is the way to get to reverence of God. However, it is impossible to attain this higher reverence, which again we said was seeing God within the world, and the Chachma without first observing Torah and mitzvos. Which brought me back to what I quoted from Herbert Weiner. The way to reach spirituality is first through doing Torah and mitzvot. Um, it's actually in his book. He writes he came to one of the Hasidim in 770 in Crown Heights, and he asked him. He says, I'm hanging around Chabad. I see how it's working, but I'm trying to like figure out how does it actually work. Like, I mean, sure, the Rebbe's very charismatic, and I could see why people would like him, but he couldn't understand how, where's the secret? And the guy told him, you're not going to understand it unless you do the deeds, unless you do the Torah mitzvahs. You're not going to get it. You gotta run before you could. You gotta walk before you could run. Again, very, very fascinating. I have two of the books at home if anyone wants to borrow. Very fascinating read. Um, However, it's impossible to attain this higher reverence without first observing Torah mitzvahs. Okay. Which comes through the superficial lower reverence. Okay. And that's why the sages say if there's no reverence, there's no chachma. So without a basic reverence of God that leads you to doing the actions, and a basic reverence means lower reverence, not focusing on God as he is himself, just focusing on the fact that there's a God that vivifies the world and is watching everything and sees everything and runs this world, that alone will make you love. That alone will make you feel a reverence to God. He's a real entity, and you will follow what the king says. He's the king. And then afterwards, you can appreciate the king for who he is. That's the deeper level of reverence. Okay, so again, there's two levels of reverence. One is appreciating that there's a king, right? Appreciating there's a God. He's the king. And you're not so much focused on the deep essence and your deep relationship with the king. Just knowing there's a king, you have to listen to him. So when we can first recognize a lower level of reverence, realizing there's a real king, we will come to a reverence where God is real, I got to do what he says. That's the first level. God is real, I got to do what he says. Second level is once I know God is real, now I can build on my relationship through doing Torah mitzvahs and more meditation, and I can think about not God as much as he relates to me and vivifies me, but let me feel the beauty of God himself, which is what people call spirituality. Let me feel the beauty of God himself. But that only comes after you start with the first level of reverence, which leads to action, realizing that God is a real entity. Okay, so those are the two layers of awe. So if we want to put the two levels of awe in a very simple manner, it's the difference between an awe that is mostly about me or an awe that is mostly about God. Is it mostly about uh, my, is it mostly about what God does for me? And I'm in awe of him for that? Or is it mostly about my appreciation for him and I'm in awe of that? Right? I'll say that again. Is it mostly about what God does for me and I'm in awe of that? He's my king, he gives me life. Or is it mostly about my awe of him? So I want, I want to respect that, my awe of him. Okay, now we get to love. Now we're ready for love. Who's ready for some love? Anybody has any questions about reverence before I go to love? I know it was quick. You can refer back to the last class, but that's the general idea. There's a reverence and awe that focuses not so much on who God is, but what God does, and that's mostly about me, and that applies in any relationship. Then there's always the deeper level of the relationship where you're focusing on who God is, and that's again applies in our other relationships of life. So let's talk about love. Um, what is love? Okay, so um, so again, we'll find out in love that there are different levels. And actually, throughout the next couple chapters, so there's many chapters of love. There's actually, the Tanya will discuss five different general layers of love, and within each layer of love, um, there's multiple layers in there as well. And I know people here ask all the time, what is the purpose of knowing all these levels? And the answer is, first, you need to know what general level you're in. There is differences in the level of love you're having and the importance of those levels of love. And then you always have to know that each of those loves are broken down into multiple possibilities to know that even a love that may sound not possible for you, you can tap into some of it, if that makes any sense, right? So that's why we say each level of love is multi-level. Um, one second. Each level is layered and multi-level so that you can know that even if you can't reach the highest level of whatever level of love it is, you can reach somewhere in it. Make sense? Because like for example, we discussed in Tanya earlier about very lofty levels. And you should always know when you hear about these lofty levels, don't think they are not possible for you. They are possible for you. You just might have, a 1% of it at times. It's still possible for
How do
you.
you, how do you know what level you're at?
Well, I honestly don't know how many levels there are. There's probably, if you want to say an infinite number of levels. That's why I think it's important to realize the categories. There's five categories of love. Within those categories, there's multi-levels. So I think you can notice which category you're in. How high or how low, you don't really ever know. The only real way to know how high you are is only to compare yourself, right? So if you've been working on a specific type of love of God, if you track your life, which you should, I've spoken about this last couple of sermons at Shul, right? Where the only way to know if you're progressing in life is to measure yourself against yourself. Measuring ourselves against other people doesn't really work. As a Jew, we're supposed to spend every single night taking an accounting of our day, how successful we were, see what we did well. So if we're following ourselves on our spiritual journey, we can tell when our love is doing better or worse. My one of my great teachers, Rabbi Akiva Wagner, he was my teacher in Toronto, Canada. He passed away a couple of years ago, unfortunately, very young age. But after he passed away, they found a notebook. He was always a special guy. They found a notebook, like a diary of his, where every day he would write in his diary, like how his prayers went, did he feel connected, how far did he go? Very, very fascinating, but I always know him to be a special guy, but you don't realize, special people actually put in extra effort. He was literally keeping track of where his spirituality was taking him. So what can I tell you? Everything requires hard work. So do you want to know what level we're at? The really only way is to track yourself. It's not can't really compare against other people, but knowing the categories of love, you can know what you're aiming for. That's helpful.
Yeah,
I
that sounds
hope.
good. Can I ask
All
one more
right.
question?
Yeah.
How do we know? Well, do you feel the answer is probably you're not sure, right? But I'm just maybe might be a rhetorical question actually. Does Hashem look upon me in the same way who grew up like with a different kind of belief that I was raised, I was ingrained that like God doesn't exist? So does Hashem look upon me who's challenged by all the mitzvahs differently and have more compassion? And it might be like I don't know, Nina, but I just was curious.
So now you're getting to level of judgment. And we call God the true judge because God is the only one who can put all factors together. And but that's something we only worry about when we go to heaven. I'm not, or maybe Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. But even then, again, judgment is in the hands of God, and God is the only one who can give true judgment because only He knows exactly how we grew up and all our, environmental factors and our families and whatnot. So yes, God puts that into account, but that's judgment. That's unrelated to my personal divine service. Okay, my personal divine service is I want to progress as far as I can in my connection to God, as far as I can. Okay, as far as I can do it. So. I will take the teachings that I have and I will try and do the best that I can. And I trust that God, the true judge, will see that I'm putting my best effort. And whenever the time for judgment comes, which I don't worry about too much, whenever the time for judgment comes, I know that He will put everything in the right perspective. So, but we don't. It's not healthy to focus on God's judgment a lot, um, because we're not serving God for reward or punishment or anything else. We're just trying to be the best versions of ourselves. Does that make sense?
100%.
Okay, good. All right, so with that, let's talk about the five levels of love, and it will go from the top to the bottom. Okay, because the Tanya is actually going to start at the top. The highest level is called Ahava Rabbah, the great love. So, um, let's put it this way. Within love, let's give you two general types of love. There is love of a distance and love of closeness. I'll say that again. There's love of distance and love of closeness. When the object of your love is far away, there is a great uh, infatuation, flaming desire, uh, pining, right? There's a lot of seeking, right? It's a lot of seeking, a lot of wanting it. Versus love, once you get to that closeness, is more of what we would call, Tanya would call a love of enjoyment. Okay. So it's no longer a love that is making you seek. It's a love that allows you to enjoy because now you are experiencing the closeness. You don't need any more to pine and seek. So, if you read the Tehillim, the Psalms, you will find these two themes. Um, or you read the Book of Solomon, you'll find these themes throughout these two different types of loves. Most often, you'll find the love of pining, right? King David says, "My soul is thirsting for you. I'm like a soul in a parched desert." That describes a love when you're feeling distant from God. So when you're feeling distant from God, it's um, it's called ahava. Sorry, let me just letting someone in. When you feel a distance from God, um, that is what we might call a love of desire. A love of desire. Love of desire is when you're far. You're desiring the object of your love. It's far from you. You cannot really truly fully enjoy it yet because it's far from you. You love it, you want it, and you're desiring it. It's like the difference between the love you feel when you're driving to the ice cream store versus the love you feel when you're eating the ice cream, right? The love you're feeling when you're driving to the ice cream store is one level of love to that ice cream. You just love it. You're feeling it in your mouth that you really want it. And you just can't wait to get there. And the moment you unwrap the ice cream and you bite into it, that's a whole nother level of love, and it all changes. So in our love of God, there's the love that King David describes often. Um, my soul is thirsting for you, it's pining for you. But then you have also the love that's discussed. Let's say, example, King Solomon, I'm to my beloved is to me. I have come to my garden, my sister, my bride, those types of languages. So, um, when we feel far from God, which is generally our experience on this earth, by the way, in this earth, we're usually going to feel farther from God because it's hard to feel God see him, because we live in a physical world. So the experience in this world is usually an experience of pining and desire because it's a love from distance. And the love that a soul feels in the Garden of Eden is a love of closeness, a love of enjoyment. That's actually part of what we call the reward of the Garden of Eden. It says in Gan Eden, what do souls do? It says, Yoshvin v'nehenin miziv hashchina. The souls in heaven, they sit and they enjoy the light of the divine presence. Right? So imagine their whole life they're desiring, they're trying to get closer to God, which, by the way, explained earlier in Tanya that only true closeness is by doing a Torah mitzvah. So when you do a Torah mitzvah, it's one of the opportunities you have to feel close to God, right? That Tanya said earlier. He's like, we see crazy people. It's like a person, somebody crying for water, and there's water right in front of them. He says the same thing. If you're crying if you're crying for closeness to God, and you have an opportunity to do a mitzvah, do the mitzvah. The problem is, in this world, when we do a mitzvah, we don't necessarily feel the closeness to God we get from the mitzvah. But that is the reality. The mitzvah accomplishes what the object of our love is. The object of our love is God, if you've reached that level, of course. And the mitzvah allows us to, quote unquote, quench that desire. Um, so, with that understanding, we can also understand that the love of closeness, the ability to feel a love of closeness to God, the pleasurable love of God, to be able to feel that in this world is a gift from God. I'll say that again. The ability to feel, to truly feel that closeness to God, not just know about it, to truly feel it is a gift from God because we live in a physical world where truly we cannot see God. And I'm not saying it never happens to us. It does happen to us. But it only happens to us when we start with a lower level of God, of love of God. If we start desiring God and we start to seek out God and we have this love of pining towards God and we do a mitzvah, God may bless us with that other level of love where we feel a closeness. Not always, and we probably won't feel the level of closeness that our souls feel in the Garden of Eden, and we won't feel the level of closeness that a tzaddik feels. But can you imagine? This is what a tzaddik walks around with all day. That's the gift that a tzaddik has. A tzaddik literally walks around. They're not just seeking God, though sometimes they are. They get the gift often of literally feeling that closeness to God. That's what makes them special. They're very, very special. We too can taste it at certain times. We have the ability to have a little bit of that feeling, the enjoyment we have from a mitzvah, a close feeling of God we get. That's why I said there's categories, and then within the categories, there's different levels. And so the level that we will feel of a closeness to God will not be what a tzaddik will feel, but we can still have those opportunities and those moments. But what the Tanya is telling us is that that will only come to us if we start with the first level of love. If we first start to desire God. So we meditated, and we'll explain throughout the chapters what we meditate on and how we come to desire God. And then we quench our thirst with a mitzvah. God may bless us with a feeling of closeness to God. So with that, um, with that preface that we've now explained what we're talking about, let us read inside. Anybody has any questions before I read inside? But hopefully, oh yes, I didn't say all five levels of love. I don't know if I should confuse you now. I only explained two levels of love. I don't think he's going to discuss the other three levels right now. He'll discuss them elsewhere. So I'm going to go with not confusing you for right now. Okay. So let us read inside, see what he says. Listen to this. So he says, what we just finished discussing of reverence, it concludes our discussion of reverence, which began in chapter 41. Now we will turn to discuss love for God, which is the second crucial component, the second wing of the bird that will propel your mitzvahs heavenward. So now he's hearkening back to remind you what we discussed in the chapters, in the 30 chapters, in chapter 31, 32, whatever, all those chapters, about the importance of having feelings towards God, the two feelings, love and awe. Now with love of God, there are also two levels: ahava rabbah, great love, which I described to you as the love of pleasure, and a lower level of love, worldly love, or the love of pining, as I described it. The two terms, great love and worldly love, are taken from the daily liturgy, and they are often used in Kabbalistic works to describe different experience of love we have for God. So if you get a siddur, actually, I'll get a siddur here. Uh, get a siddur. So it's in our prayers. Um, So before you say the Shema, and if you have a blue sitter, you can find it on page. You can find it on page 41. Okay, we say on page 41 in the Siddur. Ahavat olam avtanu Hashem Elokeinu. A love of the world. You have loved us, Lord your God. Okay? So I'll show you in here. Ahavat olam. And I don't know, love our God, you have loved us with an everlasting love. So they translate it here as everlasting love because olam can mean everlasting, but olam can also mean world. And so the love of world means a love that is available and easy for us to experience in this world. That's how the Kabbalists explain. It means the love that's available in this world, meaning in this world where we cannot truly feel close to God, that's the more basic level of love, the love of pining desire. However, some versions of the Siddur say ahava rabbah, a great love. And in fact, I think the Ashkenaz have in their prayer books, I think it's Ashkenaz, right? Ashkenaz in the morning, in their morning prayers, they don't say Ahavat Olam, they don't say the love of the world, they say Ahava Rabbah, a great love. And so the Kabbalists explain that these two levels of love, and that's why, by the way, why we don't say it in our prayers in Chabad, because it's not necessarily available to us. But they say Ahava Rabbah, a great love. So if you ever hear the two different versions, Ahavat Olam or Ahava Rabbah, love of the world or great love, now you know what they are. One is love of the world, the love of pining, the love that's available in this world, and Ahava Rabbah, the great love, is the love of pleasure, which is a gift from God. So let's take a look back inside. Now, with love of God, there are two levels. The higher level, Ahava Rabbah, the great love, and the lower level, Ahavat Olam, worldly love. The two terms great love and worldly love are taken from the daily liturgy and are often used in Kabbalistic works to describe different experiences of love we have for God. Ahava Rabbah is also described as pleasurable love, right? That's what I was explaining to you. A love of closeness. When you feel close, it's pleasurable. Normally, you love something you don't already have. You're drawn to it and you desire it. But as we learn in chapter 9, a pleasurable love represents the joy of already being connected to God. In this sense, it resembles the love you have taken for yourself. There's no passionate yearning to be drawn to something. You just quietly take pleasure in yourself. The word yourself, interesting. And great love is a flame that rises by itself, meaning that it's impossible to acquire through your own effort and it comes only as a gift from above. Again, because we live in this world, we're not going to feel a closeness to God naturally. To a person who is already complete in his or her reverence of God. As within the chapter 14, pleasurable love is not a direct achievement of human worship, but a kind of reward received from God when everything else has been perfected, to take pleasure in God in a way that is a foretaste of the world that is coming, right? I said souls in heaven, they enjoy this pleasurable love of God. They sit there and they enjoy God. As the famous Hasidic insight on the teaching of our sages of blessed memory, the way of man is to seek a woman, which where in this insight love is indicated spiritually as male and masculine. The way of love, masculine, is to seek and following after reverence. Meaning, in Hebrew, every word can be uh, male or female. And since they chose the word ahava is the male or the masculine. Why is it masculine? It's masculine because love is a desire, a seeking. Usually, the typical love we experience is a seeking, a desire, which is the lower level of love. That's why love is generally male, masculine in the language of Hebrew. Scripture hints at connection between masculine and love when it states he remembers his kindness. And the word remember in Hebrew, zachar, can also be read as zachar, meaning either remember or male. And scripture hints to a connection between feminine and reverence with the word a woman God-fearing. Um, this insight, I love how I don't know why people always call me during when I'm giving classes. It's interesting. It's like people don't call me all day. Suddenly they know. All right. This insight being known from Rabbi Dober of Mezrich, the way of man love is to seek, suggests that love man comes to seek a person who is completely in reverence of God. So that's another way of saying it. Anyways, this is all Kabbalistic ideas that are not important to our main point. Our main point is, as he says here in the practical lesson, love of God has two levels. The higher level Great love is a pleasurable love, the joy of already being connected to God. The great love, ahara rabbah, can't be earned and will come only as a gift from above to a person who is already complete in his or her reverence of God. Let us continue. And the explanation why, without first having complete, um, one second. Okay, I made a mistake here. So the love, just like the male seeks the female, the great pleasurable love is a gift from God. It comes from God. So it's as if God is seeking us. Whereas the awe is the female because it comes from us. Like I said, it's a Kabbalistic thing. It's not important to our general thing here. Then he continues. Without first having completed reverence, it is impossible to reach this level of great love. It is because this great love is a transpersonal consciousness of Atzilus, a realm where there's no slicing and separation, God forbid. So to receive great love, your consciousness needs to be the level of Atzilus to attaining higher reverence. So let me explain what he means by that. What he means by that is like this. We explained when we spoke about reverence, right? We said there's a reverence which focuses on my fear of what the person can do to me or what they're doing in this world, right? So I have reverence and awe in their presence because they're the king, they're dangerous, they're whatever they are, right? Powerful, mighty, life-giving. The focus, though, is on what they're doing for me. So it's still about me. In order to experience a higher level of reverence, I need to focus on God Himself, right? Stop focusing on what He does for me, but who He is, the essence of God. Look beyond God as the creator, right? We often talk about God as the creator, the master of the world. No, but then there's God in his essence, who's not doesn't have to be a creator. God in his essence doesn't have to create anything. When I can get to God himself, then it's less about me and it's more about God. And that's the same thing what this higher level of love is. The higher level of love is when I'm no longer seeking God, I'm with God. And that's why when you get to the higher level of reverence, then you become ready for that higher level of love. Because the lower level of reverence is focusing on what God does for you. That's when there's you and there's God and there's what God does for you. When you get to the higher level of love, the higher level of awe, now you've gotten to a place where you're focusing no longer on God as the creator, but God himself. And so you can get to a place where you're, so to speak, subsumed within God, as we spoke about. And at that point, you may get to that level of closeness to God where you will feel a pleasure in God. Um, and that is indicative of the spiritual world of Atzilut. Atzilut is the highest of the four spiritual worlds, a place where there's only God and only God consciousness. But again, it requires focusing on, what do they say? Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, right? So ask not what God is doing for you, but ask what you can do for God. But again, the focus is on God. Um, okay. Uh, okay. So let's talk about now. So for some reason, Tanya started with the highest level of love. Now we're going to take a step down, talk about the regular level of love, the love that comes a love of desire, a love of distance. Okay. I'll just start with a story. The story is, and this is just, an old story of, you got to walk before you can run. The story is, there was one time a man who read in the holy books that said that if you fast for 40 fasts and you don't speak any mundane things, and you roll over and you go outside in the snow and you don't wear any shoes, you will get a revelation of Elijah the prophet. Right? So in other words, you totally strip yourself of physicality. So this guy did it. He fasted. He didn't talk anything. He was outside in the snow without his shoes. And after 40 days, he did not merit to see the prophet Elijah. So the man went to the Baal Shem Tov, the great Hasidic master, and he asked him, he says, I don't understand. I did everything the book said, and I still did not see the prophet Elijah. So the Baal Shem Tov says, come with me. They go outside, and the Baal Shem Tov says, you see this horse over here? It was in the winter time. He says, you see this horse? Let me tell you about this horse. He's very special. For the last 40 days, um, he did not speak he kept his mouth clean. He didn't say anything wrong. For the last 40 days, he's been walking in the snow. He has no shoes. And also he didn't see the prophet Elijah. So what's the point? The point is because it's a horse. So, if you're gonna just fast, but you're a horse, so to speak, your spiritual divine service is nowhere. You're not gonna get to see Elijah. When the book was saying you could see Elijah if you do X, Y, and Z, is if you're somebody or you've gotten somewhere in your spiritual journey already. And that's the same thing here is we just spoke about a very high level of love, but like we said, as beautiful as it sounds, the ability to feel one with God and feel a pleasurable love of God, as we said in the beginning of the class, you got to walk before you can run, right? You got to crawl before you can walk. You got to take baby steps, as they say. And that is the second level of love. The second level of love, which is really the first level of love, the love of the world, the love which is a flaming desire to God, which truthfully any of us can reach. A flaming desire to God. If we think about God enough, we will desire Him and want Him. How do we reach this flaming level of love to God? Unlike the other level of love, of closeness, which is a gift, this is in our ability. How is it in our ability? As the Tanya said many times, Kikara velecha davarmot is very much in your hands through meditation. The key to the heart, the key to feelings is through the mind. And when we meditate about God, as we'll discuss in a moment, it will allow us to come with a flaming desire to God. And by the way, when we have this flaming desire to God, it automatically makes us more spiritual. Because when you're filled with passion towards what you love, anything that separates you from the object of your love becomes problematic and evil in your eyes, right? So anything that's getting in your way, you wanna get rid of all obstacles that will prevent you from getting what your desire of love is. And so for us personally, that's a beautiful and will help us very much in our spiritual life. If I can feel a flaming level of love to God, then I will not do sins, right? Because they'll get in my way. They'll get in my way of love, right? So it's not just I'm afraid of the punishment I'll get from what will happen if I sin. I have such a flaming desire from God. I want to connect to Him. Why would I want sins that will disconnect me from Him? Um, so he says like this. Um, but yeah, but again, when people have a flaming desire to something, like nothing else in life becomes important. So if we were to truly experience this flaming desire to God, a flaming desire to want to connect Him, when we say flaming, just like flames are always, going up, if we can feel this desire to connect to God, everything else in life would become less important. The ball game, the food that we eat, the pleasurable things in life become less important unless they are part of our divine service. So it doesn't mean we need to cut out all physicality. It just means if they're not directly serving my connection to God, then I don't really have much interest in them. Um, that was actually one of the points in Herbert Weiner's book that I mentioned earlier. Is he lives a conflicted life because he wants everything. He wants spirituality with God, and he wants everything else in life. And he says a true chassid, a true devout follower of Hasidic philosophy is someone who doesn't feel torn in life because they have one desire and one desire only, and they just follow that desire, and it's beautiful and it's wholesome. It's easy. So let us read here. Most of us are torn by our desires in all different ways. So he says like this. However, the lower level of worldly love can be acquired through your efforts, and it does not require you to reach higher reverence. Worldly love, as the name suggests, is longing for God that you can acquire through your knowledge of the world. It is also called worldly love because anyone in the world can merit it if he chooses. So it has two reasons it's called worldly love. Anybody can get it, and it comes from thinking about the world. Worldly love results from meditating on the greatness of the blessed infinite light as it can be known through the world using your bin and das. In other words, you can think of God's light as He's vivifying this world. Unlike the above higher reverence, where you had to use your wisdom to see and perceive otherworldly truth, here you use your bina, your understanding, beginning with and das, beginning with the reality as you know it, and continuing from there. Bina, understanding, gradually discerns one thing from another in logical steps. The physical world exists through God, which means that God's creative energy must be everywhere. And Das then decides whether Bina's conclusion are true and real for you. The two approaches, Chokhmah and Bina Das, each have their own strength. Chokhmah enables you to perceive a truth which is completely beyond and incompatible with your existence, leading you to identity-dissolving experience of higher reverence. Bina and Das, which means you really got to understand what you're reading, not, accept it, on the other hand, connects more with your ego and animal soul. So they bring you to love God, since love is an emotion which expresses ego and self, right? It's more about what it does for me. So you can love God and it's still stemming from your ego. I love God, He's good for me. Even if you'll do only good things, it can still stem from ego. And you feel it more passionately in physicality. That's why the result of Bina Das meditation is called worldly love, because A, it uses worldly egoic part of your psyche, and B, the meditation begins and is anchored in the worldly phenomenon. To acquire worldly love, first you contemplate with your understanding how God fills all the worlds, that God is the energy of every single thing in the universe, which He created continually, and that will eventually lead you to the realization that God transcends all the worlds, that God's creative energy within the world are vastly surpassed by His energies beyond this world. He actually explains it very nicely in the book again, Nine and a Half Mystics, these two levels of God. But we've spoken about them, it's not that important. This will lead you to the realization in His presence, everything is considered zero. Again, what he's saying is God has three general modalities of energy. God has a very tailored energy for this world, which is called the light of God that fills the world. Then there's God's transcendent light that gives more of a general energy to the world. Then there's recognizing, ultimately, you realize that to God, none of this matters, even though He's giving it energy. He doesn't need any of it. Then he continues. Even the awareness that God fills all the worlds and transcends all the worlds is ultimately based on the dualism of God versus world. But in the non-dual consciousness that the Tanya has taught us, there is only one reality, God. Everything else is considered zero in His presence. Tanya reminds us briefly of the illustration of this idea. In other words, it's not that there's a world and God is creating the world. Truthfully, the world is not separate from God. The world is considered zero in God's presence, just as one linguistic phrase produced by the intellectual soul doesn't have its own identity in its pre-linguistic part of the soul's consciousness, while it still remains in the soul's unarticulated thought or in the yearning of the heart as mentioned above. In other words, when we hear the world is created by God's speech, we might think the world is separate from God, right? Because God spoke, and now the spoken word is its own thing, right? You can record a spoken word. And so now the world exists on its own. It got its energy from God. No, God's spoken word is not like our spoken word. God's spoken word is like a thought still in our mind. And so it's still totally subsumed within God. If you want to say we're like God's daydream, we're still totally within God. Let's skip this paragraph. And this above meditation will instinctively cause love in your soul to strip off her prior garments, to detach herself from the things she loves before. If you were to realize the truth of the world that you're living in, then everything that you're following suddenly becomes meaningless. Okay, so I don't know. There's all different pleasures people have: video games and movies, and the latest episode in the Netflix series, and the latest sports game, and who's going to win. All that doesn't really matter in the long term. Um, Meaning that your soul will not attach its love to any pleasurable delight, be it physical or even spiritual, and won't desire any worldly thing at all. This gets to what I said earlier. Just like when you have a pining desire in love, anything that gets in the way of that love, you don't care about. When you're solely focused on the true vivifying life force of this world, which this world is truly subsumed in, which is God, everything else becomes not important. Now, I don't live with that all day, so I still care about my chocolate cake. But when you live that way, chocolate cake becomes less important. It doesn't matter. And studying Torah and doing mitzvahs and finding ways to have that connection matter to you. Um, let's read this, and we should be close to where we're finishing today. Um, you're drawn to love something based on your evaluation that is good for you. Physical pleasures make you feel good, so you desire it. Knowledge helps you make sense of the world, so you want it. That rule never changes. Um, you will always love what you deem to be good, but you can challenge your assumption of what constitutes good and transfer your love to something more valuable. For example, you might love eating ice cream and cake every day, but when you ponder the fact that it'll probably make you sick and shorten your life, you can reprogram yourself to genuinely desire a more healthy diet, assuming you love long life, right? You supplant the desire for immediate sensual pleasures with a greater desire for healthy and long life. In a similar way that Tanya promises, you can come to love God through a meditative practice which devalues the world and its pleasures through the awareness of God's will as something even more desirable. So it's still egocentric. It's about what's good for you, but but it will lead you to leaving the world behind. So you have 2 minutes. I'll just read this paragraph and I'll leave the next part because that's a verse. Though the above meditate through the above meditation, you will come to love God alone and the living source of all pleasures, since all the pleasures of this world have no separate existence, and they are considered zero in His presence literally, and there's no comparison to be made anyway between Him, God forbid. In the same way, you cannot compare absolute, null and void with eternal life. There's no comparison, eternal life or a short life of some pleasures. You know what? I should read this next paragraph because it does end here. As the verse indicates, whom else do I have to love in heaven besides you? I want no one on earth. My body and heart expire. God is forever the base of my heart. These are psalms that express the pining desire of love. And when you have the pining desire of to God, everything else doesn't matter. I don't want anything. I just want you, God. And the insignificance of this physical world and its pleasures will be explained further below. And we're not going to continue. So the point is, if we compare physical pleasures with the pleasures of God, it is easy to see that one is worthless compared to the other. While the physical world might seem alluring, your metaphysical intuition can easily see that this world has no power of its own and is utterly dependent on God. They tell the story, just to end up with a story. There was a great chassid, Rabbi the Masmid. He was a powerfully spiritual man, chassid of the sixth Chabad Rebbe, and he came to New York to fundraise for Chabad, and then he went back to Russia. He was unfortunately killed by the Nazis, not to Russia, wherever he went. Anyways, Poland. He went back well before the Second World War, but he came back to fundraise in the 20s or 30s, I don't remember. And he came to New York, and I asked him, "How do you you impressed by Manhattan?" You know, he's coming from Poland. There was a shtetl life. Were you impressed by Manhattan, the tall skyscrapers, everything? He says, he's a shmarei fanim. What does that mean? It says that all the pleasures of this world are like the excrement of the angels in heaven. So he said, over here in Manhattan, looks like the angels had diarrhea. So that's how he looked at it. Okay, so there's taller buildings, but it's all the same. It's all the same as the saying. It's just all the same dreck. It's just more of it. I'm not impressed by it. It's more dreck. It's nothing compared to the angels themselves. The spirituality itself is so much greater than anything that this world can offer. And so that's a love that we can easily get to. Anyways, we'll have to stop here. If anybody has questions, you can ask. But thank you all for coming.